We're still 3 weeks away from spring football, but Cam Ward is already hitting the ground running at Miami.
You are Locked On Canes, your daily podcast on the Miami Hurricanes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I am Alex Donno, University of Miami alumnus, longtime South Florida sports radio vet, and contributor to allhurricanes.com. And thank you to the everydayers for making Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch today. We are free wherever you get your podcasts. We're free on YouTube, and we're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So the official spring football practices don't begin until March 4th. But as we all know, college football, it's a year-round thing when it comes to training and conditioning. And, you know, all the transfer players, including Miami's prized acquisition, Cam Ward, the former Washington State quarterback, and the early enrollee freshmen are already on campus. They're going through the strength and conditioning program. They're in the weight room. They're out on the field working out together. And that includes Cam Ward working out with and hopefully building chemistry with his wide receivers in orange and green for this coming season. Cam spoke on the Canes Connection. That's the official Miami NIL collective. He spoke on the Canes Connection X account. And here's a little bit of what Ward had to say about the workouts that he's having with a few of what should be his most important receivers this coming year.
I think Strep is our dog. Jacolby, he's going to be the factor that's going to take us all the way. And even the young cat that I've been throwing to recently, JoJo. I feel like JoJo is that special player that not a lot of teams have in the country at that age for their freshman year, but I feel like he's going to be a huge impact player for us.
Now, how cool is that to already have JoJo get the nod and get a mention like that? We're talking about a true freshman, early enrollee, 4-star, 5-star receiver, depending on which publication you looked at, out of Chaminade Madonna this past season. And yes, we've talked about it on this show before. We're hearing reviews of JoJo Trader just crushing the offseason program. Honestly, I think a lot of people didn't realize, like, everyone knows Trader is really good. I think a lot of people didn't realize just how special JoJo is because his former high school teammate, Jeremiah Smith, the number one recruit in the country, who also played wide receiver at Chaminade, I think was taking a lot of the headlines from Trader away. And a lot of people were really focusing on covering Jeremiah and not focusing as much on covering JoJo. And then another part about JoJo Trader is two-way player in high school, played defensive back and wide receiver. He's going to get a lot more downs and more consistent downs at wideout at Miami because he's not going to be a two-way guy with the Hurricanes. He's going to be strictly an offensive player. So I think JoJo Trader is going to end up just absolutely blowing up. You look at his stats from his senior year in high school, caught 14 touchdown passes this past year at Chaminade, 6'1", 180 pounds. You know, by the time spring football begins, I'm guessing he's packing on some size in the weight room. Trader might end up being even bigger. And with the way that things are sounding, and listen, we have a long way to go, right? Workouts don't always reveal the truth about who's going to be where on the depth chart. We're going to know a lot more through spring football, through fall camp especially. But with the way things are trending at this moment, folks, I would not be shocked if JoJo Trader ends up one of Miami's 3 top wide receivers this coming season. If he can be a guy who can even carve out a starting spot or be top 3 this season in targets, I think he's doing that well so far. Again, we'll know more once fall camp rolls around. We'll have a better idea once spring football is finished, but you have to love the way that JoJo Trader is trending. So you also heard Ward. First guy he brings up, of course, is Xavier Restrepo. That's who he called Strep. Strep is our dog. He said Jacolby George, he's going to be the factor that's going to take us all the way. And, you know, that one it's reaffirming something that we heard. I think it was Gabby and David at Inside the U who talked about it this week on their podcast, that they're hearing that the chemistry and offseason workouts is going really, really well between Jacolby George and Cam Ward. And then, of course, Cam also mentioning Xavier Restrepo. That was one of the first guys that he really connected with off the field. Once he got down to Miami, these guys were posting pictures with one another on social media. And listen, I know that some people out there have, created this savior narrative for Cam Ward. I don't think he needs to be a savior. I think he needs to be better than what Miami had last year. I think he needs to be more consistent than what Miami had last year. And I think he and Shannon Dawson, the offensive coordinator / quarterbacks coach, have to work together diligently so that they can design game plans and call plays that maximize what Cam Ward does best, because there's a lot of things that he does really, really well. And listen, he's not a savior. The entire team needs to be saviors, right? If you're looking at Miami, hopefully, fulfilling the expectations that have been set by Las Vegas, and we'll talk about that, very high expectations compared to the first 2 years under Cristobal. The entire team needs to elevate themselves. It's not just about the quarterback, but Cam Ward does come in highly touted for a reason. Ward, this past season at Washington State, completed 66.6% of his passes, 3,735 yards, which is more than 1,000 more than Van Dyke had last year in Miami, with 25 touchdown passes to just 7 interceptions. And Ward added 8 rushing touchdowns last year. We talked about Xavier Restrepo, who's probably going to be his number one target, at least in terms of the number of receptions. Strep last year, 85 grabs for 1,092 receiving yards and 6 touchdown catches. He was second in the ACC in both catches and yards last year, and Jacolby George wasn't far behind him. Now, Jacolby's got to find just more consistency when it comes to his attitude, but on the field, when this guy is in his groove, he's excellent. Jacolby George last year scored a team-high 8 receiving touchdowns on 57 catches for 864 yards. He averaged 15.5 yards per catch last year to George. And I talked about Restrepo was second in the ACC in receiving yards last season. George was right behind Restrepo at third in the ACC with his 864 receiving yards. And you throw JoJo Trader into that mix, and then listen, we can talk, we can run down the entire receiving core, but you guys also know I'm not sleeping on Isaiah Horton. I think if you're talking about which could be the top 3 guys to be in the starting lineup or the top 3 or 4 guys who get the most targets and the most snaps this coming season, I think Isaiah Horton, who's got that big frame at 6'4", is also in the running for significant playing time this coming season. I love the way JoJo Trader is trending, and I wonder if he can trend all the way into the starting lineup this next year. Folks, we have a lot to talk about on this episode of Locked On Canes. It's great to hear Cam Ward working hard and building chemistry. Obviously, Mario Cristobal is always out there recruiting. Cristobal is trying to engineer a class of 2025 that's as good or better than the top 5 or top 4 class of 2024 or the top 7 class of 2023. There were a couple of predictions dropped in Miami's favor late in the week, courtesy of Stephen Wagner from On3 Sports. He has projected 2 local high school stars to take their talents to Miami for the class of 2025. I'm also going to answer some of you guys' questions on this episode, and we got to talk about that Vegas over-under. I never thought I'd say this out loud. Bear with me. Are the odds makers giving Miami too much respect? We will discuss on this brand new episode of Locked On Canes. You want to keep it locked. And I know you're keeping it locked to LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find qualified professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs holds the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. I know this works because I've gotten jobs through LinkedIn before. LinkedIn isn't just another job board. LinkedIn has a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals, which makes it the best place to hire. It gives you access to professionals you can't find anywhere else. LinkedIn does all of that while making the process easy and intuitive. Hiring is easy when you have that many quality candidates. So easy, in fact, that 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. You can become one of those. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Thank you so much for making this episode, this Super Sunday episode of Locked On Canes, your first listen and your first watch today. We are available free wherever you get your podcasts. We're free on YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. If you're an everydayer, you want to take your everydayer experience to the next level by becoming a Locked On Canes insider. Click the link in the show description below, and you can get text messages directly from my phone to yours and vice versa. You can ask me one-on-one questions. I give you guys breaking news and recruiting scoops. Try it free for 14 days by clicking the link in the show description below for Locked On Canes insiders. And then if you like it, you can opt in for $4.99 a month. We try to give you a lot of added value on there. Recruiting predictions. So these players were given the on-3 version of a crystal ball. I know crystal ball sounds better to say, but that's like a trademarked 24/7 sports thing. So an on-3 prediction machine forecast, so whatever they call it, a couple of these have been dropped in Miami's favor. The Hurricanes have been projected to land 4-star Miami Central defensive lineman Randy Adirika and 4-star American Heritage running back Byron Louis. These predictions were logged by Stephen Wagner from Canes Sport. That's the Miami On3 affiliate. Now, both of these players, folks, represent and come from very important Miami pipelines in local high schools that you want to keep these pipelines churning. Adirika on the defensive line at Central, 6'5", 250 pounds. He's a junior in high school, and he's 6'5", 250. He's On3 Sports, 33rd ranked defensive lineman in the class. And we talk about pipelines. Miami has now made it a tradition under Mario Cristobal to land top defensive linemen from Central, because in the class of 2023, Miami landed Ruben Bain, who was one of the most outstanding freshmen in the country this past year. And then in the class of 2024, Miami has landed Armando Blunt, who is an early enrollee, and he's going to try to have the same sort of impact that Bain had this past year. And if Blunt can do that, would be incredible, because he's a year younger than, a normal high school freshman, because he actually enrolled early despite being a junior in high school. So he should be in the second semester. He's got great grades, obviously very good in the classroom, in addition to being a great player. But he's only 16 years old right now, is Armando Blunt, and he's out there rocking and rolling. So Miami has also been projected to land their former teammate Randy Adirika in the class of 2025. And I mentioned the running back. This is a player I would love to have, and it's another important Miami pipeline. American Heritage Plantation. Byron Louis, listed right now, again, junior in high school, 6 foot tall, 208 pounds. He's the 16th rated running back in the class of 2025, according to On3. And yes, Miami has, a nice tradition of landing American Heritage running backs, most recently Mark Fletcher. Yeah, he had a pretty good season this past year. So hopefully, I don't know when the timelines are, maybe end of spring for one of these guys, maybe end of summer for both of these guys, but hopefully these predictions come to light and the Miami Hurricanes can land a couple of the top local players in the class. And of course, Miami landed out of the top 25 prospects in the state of Florida. Miami landed more of those than any other school in this past cycle. They landed 8 of the top 25 players in Florida. Cristobal is trying to do what Howard Schnellenberger talked about, and that's put that fence around South Florida, the state of Miami, from Orlando on down. You put that fence around the state. Cristobal is also doing a pretty nice job, though, in Jacksonville, I will add. Derek Plaza, I think, is going to be a star here, but you build that fence around the state of Miami, and the Hurricanes are trying to do that because obviously over the years, you lose historically a lot of South Florida talent to Alabama. Maybe that changes now with Saban retired. You lose a lot of South Florida talent to Florida State. You lose some to Florida. You lose a lot recently to Louisville. They've really become a heavy recruiter in this area, but Cristobal is going to try to lock more of these players down. All right, so guys, when I saw the Vegas over-under come out for Miami's win total this coming season, I was surprised. Like, I was legitimately surprised that Miami's getting this much respect. Possibly, you tell me, possibly too much respect, all right? Because in each of the past 2 seasons, Las Vegas has pegged Miami for before 2022 season and 2023. Las Vegas gave Miami an over-under in each of those years of 7.5 wins. And they went under both times. 5-7 in 2022. They fell way short of 7.5. 7-6 in 20. I don't think the bowl games count for these, but so you could say 7-5, and you do recall Miami was literally a kneel down away from going over. So if you had bet the over this past year, you're probably not a big fan of Mario Cristobal because he cost you that over. You're probably not a big fan of Tyler Van Dyke. All those interceptions costed you that over. So given the way the last 2 years have gone, we all know Miami's getting better, right? Miami brought in one of the star quarterback acquisitions in the country. Miami continues to recruit at a high level. They've done pretty well in the transfer portal. So I did expect the expectations to go up. My prediction was the over-under for this coming season would be 8.5 wins. I thought that would go up from the 7.5 of the past 2 years. Nope. The Vegas sports books and the offshore sports books have 9.5 as the over-under for the Miami Hurricanes win total this coming year. They're getting among the best respect in the entire conference. Miami, Clemson, and Florida State all have over-unders of 9.5. So you could say the handicappers consider the Hurricanes to be among the 3 best teams in the conference and among the 3 top contenders to win the ACC. So those 3 teams, including Miami, sit atop the field with 9.5 over-under as their win total. Then you've got Louisville, NC State, and North Carolina at 8.5. I'll tell you something. I think there's probably better value on taking the Louisville over than there is in taking the Miami over, since Louisville has that smaller number and they brought in, 30 guys in the transfer portal, and Braum did a really good job coaching them this past year. I think 8.5 might be a little low for Louisville. I'm just saying, I think that's one I would consider taking the over on. So below those teams, Louisville, NC State, UNC at 8.5. Then you've got Virginia Tech and SMU at 7.5. Cal, Syracuse, and Duke at 6.5. Pitt and Georgia Tech at 5.5. Then you have Wake Forest, Virginia, and Boston College at 4.5. I don't know if Bill O'Brien taking that BC job might raise their number a little bit. I know there's a lot of excitement about that. And then Stanford is in the cellar at 3.5. Now, I don't want anyone to think I'm being all negative on Miami because I said I'm surprised by the 9.5 win total. I'm just saying, at this point in Miami Hurricanes football, the expectations tend to be pretty high going into every single year. I think they might be legit finally this time around, but at the same time, Miami has underperformed their expectations a lot in the recent past. I need to see it to believe it, is all I'm saying. I'm not going to bet the under, but I'm not going to bet the over either. Now, the Hurricanes do have a more manageable schedule than they've had in recent years. I believe the 3 toughest games on the schedule, not to say there aren't other difficult games, because every ACC game has been a trap game for Miami for the last 15 years. But I believe the 3 most difficult games on the schedule are home against Florida State, at Louisville, and at Florida to start the season. So if you're talking about going 10-2 in order to cash in your ticket, you're going to have to obviously win at least one of those 3 games, which is probably doable to win one of those 3, but then you can't slip up anywhere else, right? Or if you win 2 of those 3, you're probably going over, but then you can imagine Miami might slip up against some of the lesser teams on their schedule. Now, in terms of an ACC schedule, you dodge some of the better teams in the conference. Like, you don't have to play NC State or North Carolina or Clemson this year. You avoid all of those teams. So it is an easier schedule, I believe, than what you've had in recent years. And if you can win that Florida game to start the year, which Miami should be the better team on paper, but winning in the Swamp is never easy. So if Miami can win that game, you're setting yourself up in pretty nice position for the rest of the year. But when you're talking about going over 9.5 wins, there's not a lot of margin for error there. So I'm just going to sit back and see how the season plays out. I don't think I'm going to be taking a bet on that one way or the other. Now, unfortunately, I don't think I bet the over or under for the Miami Hurricanes basketball team, but barring a miracle in the form of winning the ACC tournament, doesn't look like Miami's going to have a good enough resume no matter what happens the rest of the regular season. Hurricanes hoops team is probably not going to be in the NCAA tournament. Again, you could win the ACC tournament. Seems unlikely, but that would be your path into the NCAA tournament. But we are on life support right now after that loss, failed comeback bid against North Carolina yesterday. The Miami Hurricanes basketball hopes of making the tournament are unfortunately on life support at this moment. I want to answer some of you guys' questions when we come back. You guys are asking me about Miami's top running backs this coming year. instant impact freshman? And I love this question. I'm going to answer this on the other side. Someone asked me, which of these is the most important game for Mario Cristobal to win? Florida, Florida State, or Duke? We're going to answer those and so much more when we come back. My friends, you want to keep it locked right here. We're not done yet on Locked On Canes. Oh, and I know you're keeping it locked to FanDuel, especially today. Guys, it's not too late to get your bets in, and it's not too late to get your props in at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your team wins. So, guys, I'm looking at under 91 seconds for the national anthem today. I am looking at the Kansas City Chiefs +2. I'm looking at over 0.5 interceptions for Brock Purdy. I think he's going to throw at least one today. And my prop sheet is large, and you guys can make yours at fanduel.com/locked-on today. You want to check that out. And we also have hoops going on. Guys, you can bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and so much more. Just visit fanduel.com/locked-on and shoot your shot. FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NBA. Thank you so much for making this Sunday episode of Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch today. We're free wherever you get your podcasts. We're free on YouTube. Speaking of YouTube, guys, make sure after you watch this, you check out Locked On Sports Today. Locked On Sports Today is the first ever 24/7 streaming sports YouTube channel launched by this network, the Locked On Network. We are always on there 24/7 talking about the biggest national and local sports stories, whether it be big game previews or discussions about how the NCAA has turned into such a circus. They're getting sued left and right. NBA conversations. You can get it all at Locked On Sports Today. Got some questions I want to answer from some of our Locked On Canes insiders. And again, you can click the link in the show description below to try it free for 14 days. Locked On Canes insiders. Get a question from the 904 that says, hey, what's the most significant game this year for Mario Cristobal? At Florida, home against Florida State, or home against Duke? Now, you're spot on with your list in terms of storylines, most significant games. For me, I'll explain why, but my answer is Florida State. I think Florida State checks off all the most important boxes. Biggest rivalry Miami plays. No disrespect. I do take the Florida rivalry seriously, but it's not an every year thing, and it's not an in-conference game. Florida State is your biggest rival year over year. If you lose that game against Florida State, that's 4 in a row you would have lost to your rivals. If you win that game against Florida State, it's a big feather in Mario Cristobal's cap to win that game. And it also could set Miami up for an ACC championship appearance if you beat Florida State. Like that's the type of game that can be a make or break for that. So it's Florida State for me. With Florida, in-state team does have significance. Fan bases hate each other. There's going to be bragging rights, and it's the first game of the year, so that's going to set you up either on a great note or on a really sour note, but it's not as big as the Florida State game for me. And then the Duke game. Here's the thing why I can't put the Duke game as the most important for Mario, because a lot of downside if you lose, not nearly as much upside if you win. With that Duke game, it's just win the game to avoid embarrassment, okay? Because, again, the last time Miami played Duke, they lost to Duke, and that was before Manny Diaz became Duke's head coach, right? So if Mario Cristobal loses to Manny Diaz, the headlines and the narratives write themselves. We cannot let that happen. But guess what? If Miami wins that game, all you did was just win a game you're supposed to win. Hurricanes will be more than likely favored pretty heavily in that game. So there's not a whole lot of upside to winning that game, but there's a hell of a lot of downside to losing that game. So that would be number 3 on my list out of those. Get a question from the original Cat 5 Kane, who says, hey, Donno, why isn't there more talk about the potential 1-2 punch of 6 feet, 220 Trevante Citizen and 6'2", 225 Mark Fletcher? I feel like with the O-line we have, those boys could carry the ball about 35 to 40 times between the two of them and just beat defenses down. That's an amazing fantasy, Cat 5. And I think the reason why there's not more talk about that is we've literally never had the two of those guys healthy at the same time. So it feels like a little bit of a pipe dream, right? Now, Trevante Citizen, he's fully healthy when it comes to that knee injury and setback that he was recovering from, but he hasn't played in the past 2 years. So Trevante obviously has to show everybody that he can get that same sort of explosiveness and get his cuts back that he had in high school. So that's number one. And then unfortunately right now, Mark Fletcher is recovering from offseason surgery. We don't know exactly what the timetable is going to be there. So if I can dare to dream, you're 1,000% right. If Miami can get the two of those guys healthy and active at the same time, you've got a couple of bruising physical backs that can wear down opposing defenses and make big plays for you. So I like where your head is at. I think the reason why we're not talking about it more is because they've never been available at the same time. But when that happens, it's going to be something special. Someone asked me on the Locked On Canes Insiders chat, who were my instant impact freshmen on offense and defense? Offense, we talked about him. JoJo Trader. I think Josiah Trader could end up being one of Miami's top 4, if not top 3 receivers this year. Defense, it's got to be either Zaquan Patterson or Justin Scott. 4-star safety, 5-star defensive tackle. I could see hopefully both of those guys making big impact as true freshmen. And I'll give Zaquan Patterson love on special teams as well. The guy is a terrific return man. So I could see Zaquan being a top 2 guy, instant impact guy on defense and on special teams this coming year. And JoJo Trader for me is the guy on offense. We get a couple from our guy, the Giant Ninja. Giant Ninja says, hey, this is not a question, just a comment. Let's never forget that Miami is not a word, it's a letter. It's all about the U, he says. And then he also asked me a question, which is way off the beaten path. Says, are you or were you ever into RPGs, like the video games? Ninja, first of all, I'm terrible at video games to this day. I do have an Xbox, like the newest model Xbox, and I use it to play the game formerly known as FIFA, and I do play like the Madden from 2 years ago. Whenever I try to play first-person shooters or RPGs, first-person shooters, I'm just not coordinated enough for. I just get destroyed. RPGs, I'm not smart enough to play. I think the only RPG I've ever played was back on the Super Nintendo. Do you remember? I think they re-released it recently for the Nintendo Switch, but I played it back in the OG Super Nintendo. Super Mario RPG. You guys remember that one? I think that's the only RPG I've ever played. I know they make all these like Final Fantasy 85 and all these other like the Japanese RPG games. I think my wife might play those and she's pretty decent at them, but I can't make heads or tails of them. I only play sports games, are the only games that I'm somewhat serviceable at. All right. So I appreciate your question and comment. I appreciate everybody for making Locked On Canes your first listen today. Enjoy the big game today. We will be back tomorrow for another episode of Locked On Canes. We are part of the awesome Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.